Zentari Nexus was a hellhole masquerading as a galactic transit hub, where even the stardust seemed to have given up on life. Sure, it might have been the center of interstellar commerce, but only in the way a toilet is the center of a bathroom. The air smelled of stale ambition and desperation, mixed with whatever unholy concoction the station cafeteria dared to call food. Arlo Vex, human diplomat and certified master of bad life choices, stood amidst the chaos, feeling like a lone comedian on a particularly hostile open mic night. His mission: convince the planetary council that humans were worth anything more than a passing mention in a cosmic footnote. Easy, right? If by easy you meant about as simple as teaching a cat to bark. "It's a zoo in here," Arlo muttered, dodging a particularly aggressive tentacle that seemed intent on making a new friend. "And I thought timeshares on Earth were a hard sell." His companion, a hovering data sphere named Mox, emitted a light chuckle. "You always had a way with first impressions, Arlo." "I'd say you're in your element. If by element you mean up to my neck in crap, then yeah," Arlo shot back, adjusting his neural comm implant. "Where's this council chamber anyway? I'd hate to be late to our own execution." Mox projected a series of luminous arrows in the air, pointing towards a corridor teeming with a menagerie of aliens that would put a taxonomist to shame. "This way, fearless leader. Just watch out for the Ixians. They're not fond of, well, anything." Arlo wove his way through the crowd, trying to ignore the glares and subtle hisses directed at him. Humans were about as popular as a mandatory tax audit around here. The council chamber was at the end of a particularly discouraging hallway, its entrance framed by ominous carvings that suggested abandoned hope. "All ye who enter here" wasn't just a cute suggestion. Inside, the chamber was a study in bureaucratic intimidation. Rows of seats filled with a diverse array of council members, their expressions ranging from bored to outright murderous. At the center, on an elevated platform, sat Zathan Kor. With a face that seemed permanently etched into a scowl and a wardrobe straight out of a villain's closet, Zathan had the demeanor of someone who'd traded their sense of humor for a high-interest loan. Arlo took his place at the podium, clearing his throat with the grace of a man about to tell a joke he knew wouldn't land. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished entities of indescribable gender and form, I stand here today not to bore you with platitudes, but to offer you something revolutionary: humanity." Zathan's eyes narrowed, the kind of gaze that could freeze lava. "Humanity, you say? The species that considers war a form of competition and comedy an art form." "Ah, you've read our brochure," Arlo said, refusing to let Kor's disdain dampen his spirits. "Yes, we may have a penchant for the dramatic, but consider us a spice, not a poison." A low rumble of what might have been laughter or indigestion rippled through the chamber. Zathan leaned forward, eyes like twin black holes threatening to swallow Arlo whole. "And what, Mr. Vex, makes you think humanity has anything to offer the council?" Arlo grinned, the kind of grin you wear when you've just been caught cheating at cards. "We've got adaptability, ingenuity, and most importantly, we know how to throw a hell of a party." Mox floated closer, whispering into Arlo's ear with what passed for discretion in a floating orb. "I'd avoid using party as a selling point unless you're dealing with the Euquor. They're the only ones who think drunk and disorderly is a compliment." Arlo nodded, a quick adjustment of strategy. "What I mean is, we're survivors. We've thrived in environments that would make lesser species pack up and leave. We're stubborn, resourceful, and yes, a bit unpredictable, but isn't that what you want on your side?" Zathan leaned back, a flicker of something resembling amusement crossing his features. "You certainly are entertaining, Mr. Vex. But is entertainment enough to warrant an alliance?" "I'd like to think we're more than just cosmic jesters," Arlo replied, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd played chess with fate and lost more often than won. "Think of us as wild cards, sometimes infuriating, often surprising, but never, ever boring." The chamber fell silent, the weight of Arlo's words settling like dust on an old book. Zathan's expression was unreadable, a poker face carved from years of dealing with interstellar nonsense. "I'll consider your proposal," Zathan said finally, his voice like gravel underfoot. "But understand, Mr. Vex, humanity walks a thin line here. Impress us or be forgotten." Arlo nodded, the tension in the room as thick as the layer of grime on the station's windows. "Oh, we'll impress you, council leader. Just wait until you see our dance moves." With that, Arlo turned on his heel, leaving the chamber with the same level of confidence he'd had entering it, which was to say, he was feeling about as confident as a chicken in a fox den. Outside, the din of the station's endless hustle and bustle swallowed him whole. "Well, that could have gone worse," Mox chimed in, ever the voice of unsettling optimism. "Could it?" Arlo asked, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I think the last time I saw anyone that unimpressed I was explaining Facebook to my grandmother." "You've got a way about you, Arlo," Mox said. "Like a bad smell or a recurring nightmare." "Charming," Arlo muttered, scanning the throng for a quiet corner. "We need a new approach, Mox. Something to make them see us as more than just the galaxy's punchline." Mox word and thought, its circuits humming with the kind of intensity usually reserved for a particularly grueling Sudoku puzzle. "Perhaps if we demonstrated human resilience in a more tangible way." Arlo snapped his fingers, the eureka moment hitting him like a sledgehammer to the face. "A demonstration, something they can't ignore. Something that says we're here to stay. Any ideas on what that might be?" "Other than a karaoke night at the local bar," Mox suggested. "I was thinking more along the lines of a showcase of human technology or skills," Arlo explained, his mind racing with possibilities. "A challenge, then," Mox said, its tone lifting with the infectious energy of a scheme in the making. "Prove that humans are more than just eccentric meatbags." Arlo nodded, a wicked grin playing across his lips. "Exactly, something to break through their stubborn skulls." They paused near a viewport, the swirling cosmos beyond a stark reminder of the stakes. Humanity's future hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of oblivion or glory. And Arlo, with his irreverent charm and dubious judgment, was their chosen champion. "No pressure," Mox quipped, reading Arlo's expression with an AI precision. "Just the fate of your entire species resting on your questionable shoulders." Arlo sighed, the weight of the universe settling in like an unwanted houseguest. "Well, nobody said saving humanity would be easy. Just didn't think it'd be this bloody hard either." Arlo Vex found himself wedged between a giant slug-like alien that smelled like three-day-old gym socks and a reptilian creature spewing something that was either a philosophical debate or a particularly complex belch. It was hard to tell on the Zintari nexus, where the line between profound and profane was thinner than a politician's promise. As he elbowed his way through the crowd, Mox hovered beside him, spinning slightly as if trying to avoid the olfactory assault. "You know, Arlo, if I had a nose, I'd have amputated it by now." "You're lucky, Mox. At least you can shut off your sensory receptors." "I have to live with this," Arlo replied, pulling a face that suggested he'd rather gargle nails than endure another minute of the station's special brand of charm. Their destination was the diplomatic enclave of the Uldari, an influential faction known for their penchant for paranoia and their belief that humans were one step away from either destroying the universe or making it their personal dance floor. Either way, they weren't thrilled. As they approached the enclave's entrance, a pair of guards, whose armor looked like it had more teeth than a dentist's worst nightmare, blocked their path. "State your business," one of them growled, its voice like gravel thrown into a blender. "I'm here to see the Uldari Council," Arlo said, flashing a smile that had gotten him out of more parking tickets than he'd care to admit. "We have a little diplomatic matter to discuss." The guard's eyes narrowed suspicious slits that promised violence at the slightest provocation. "Humans are unpredictable." "The Uldari don't like unpredictability." "Unpredictable," Mox chimed in, using its best "I'm just a harmless floating ball" tone. "That's what makes us fun at parties." Arlo coughed diplomatically, stepping forward with all the confidence of a man walking into a lion's den wearing a steak suit. "Listen, we're not here to break anything, unless it's tension. We're really good at that." After an excruciating pause, filled with a silent debate between the guards' desire to beat someone up and the dull monotony of their usual duties, they stepped aside. "Proceed, but any funny business, and we'll be using your bones as toothpicks." "Charming hospitality," Arlo murmured to Mox as they entered. The Uldari council chamber was an exercise in minimalist paranoia. Bare walls, a circular table, and a single holographic projector in the center. It was like stepping into a corporate boardroom designed by a paranoid schizophrenic. Around the table sat the Uldari council members, each more stoic and inscrutable than the last. Arlo took a deep breath, preparing his pitch. "Esteemed council members," he began, channeling the kind of sincerity usually reserved for used car salesmen and politicians. "Humanity is often misunderstood. We aren't just chaos wrapped in flesh. We're innovators." One of the Uldari, a particularly grizzled specimen that looked like it had survived multiple assassination attempts, folded its arms. "Innovators? You mean like how you innovate new ways to make weapons and then pretend to regret it?" Arlo grimaced. "Okay, fair point. But we're also creators, thinkers, artists. We have a depth that goes beyond mere chaos, which is why I propose an exhibition, a showcase of human creativity and adaptability." Murmurs broke out among the council, a low din of skepticism mixed with curiosity. Mox floated slightly higher as if trying to gauge the mood. "An exhibition, Arlo. I hope you packed more than just charm." "Oh, I've got plans," Arlo whispered back, putting on a display of confidence that he didn't entirely feel. "Plans that might just include a flourish or two." The grizzled Uldari leaned forward, its eyes a pair of predatory slits. "And what would this exhibition entail, Mr. Vex?" "More destruction disguised as entertainment." "Not at all," Arlo countered, his mind racing to piece together his half-baked idea into something resembling a coherent plan. "We'll show you art, music, innovation, all the things that make humanity more than just walking disasters." The council members exchanged glances, an unspoken debate that seemed to revolve around the question of trust, or lack thereof. Finally, the grizzled Uldari spoke again. "Very well, we will permit this exhibition. But be warned, Mr. Vex, if it turns into a circus, it will be your head on the chopping block." Arlo nodded, suppressing a nervous laugh. It was hard to tell if the Uldari's threat was literal or metaphorical, and he really didn't want to find out. "You won't regret it. Humans are many things, but boring isn't one of them." As they left the chamber, Arlo let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Well, that went somewhere." "Somewhere indeed," Mox agreed, its voice dripping with sarcasm. "And if we're lucky, that somewhere won't be our graves." Back in the heart of the Zentari Nexus, Arlo set to work with the kind of determination usually reserved for people trying to convince a cat to take a bath. He roped in a few reluctant humans from the station, artists, musicians, a chef who swore he could make anything taste like chicken. Together, they transformed a drab cargo bay into a makeshift gallery of human achievement. It was a chaotic mess, with wires running like snakes across the floor, holographic displays flickering ominously, and the distant sound of someone tuning an instrument that had definitely seen better days. Mox surveyed the chaos with a critical eye. "This looks more like a fire hazard than an exhibition." "Creativity is messy," Arlo replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" As if on cue, a nearby amplifier let out a screech that could have woken the dead, or at least given them a headache. Arlo winced, mentally adding damage control to his growing to-do list. The opening night arrived, and with it, an audience that looked as skeptical as a cat faced with a new brand of cat food. The council members, including the grizzled Uldari, filed in, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and foreboding. Arlo took the stage, nerves jangling like a pocketful of loose change. Welcome, esteemed guests, to the first-ever Human Innovation Showcase. Prepare to be amazed, or at least not entirely disappointed. The lights dimmed, and the first exhibit came to life, a holographic display of human art, from the crude cave paintings of early Earth to the abstract chaos of modern creations. Mox provided commentary, its voice smooth as it explained the evolution of human creativity. Some council members murmured in appreciation, others in confusion. The grizzled Uldari remained impassive, like a stone gargoyle watching over a chaotic garden. Next up was the music section, where the musicians played everything from classical to rock, each note a testament to humanity's love for noise in all its forms. Arlo watched the council closely, noting the subtle toe tapping and head bobbing, signs that maybe, just maybe, they were starting to understand. Then came the piece de résistance, a cooking demonstration. The chef, a wiry man with more enthusiasm than sense, whipped up a dish that filled the air with mouthwatering aromas. Cuisine, he declared with a flourish, presenting the dish to the council. The grizzled Uldari leaned forward, sniffing cautiously before taking a bite. Its eyes widened, and for a moment, Arlo thought he saw something almost approaching delight. The exhibition continued, a whirlwind of sights and sounds that seemed to draw the council in, one by one. By the end of the night, the atmosphere had shifted, the initial skepticism replaced with a cautious curiosity. Arlo took to the stage once more, feeling a swell of pride that couldn't be quelled even by the lingering threat of imminent doom. Ladies and gentlemen and everyone in between, thank you for witnessing a slice of humanity. We might not always make sense, but we always make an impact. The council members filed out, their expressions as unreadable as ever. But there was something different in the air, a subtle shift that suggested maybe, just maybe, they'd seen something worth considering. As the doors closed behind the last of the audience, Arlo turned to Mox, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. Well, what do you think? Did we avoid disaster? Mox bobbed in the air, its circuits glowing with what might have been approval. You managed to make them think twice, Arlo, and that's more than most manage on this rock. Arlo nodded, the weight of the night's success settling in. Now we just have to keep them thinking. Who knew saving humanity would involve so much improvisation? Considering your track record, it seems fitting, Mox replied, its tone teasing as it hovered beside him. Together, they began to dismantle the exhibition, the mess of cables and displays gradually giving way to the stark reality of the cargo bay. The success of the night was a fragile thing, a glimmer of hope in a galaxy that often seemed intent on snuffing such things out. But Arlo Vex, with his irreverent charm and refusal to quit, was determined to see it through. Humanity's future was uncertain, but for the first time it felt like they had a fighting chance. As they left the bay, Arlo paused to look back, the ghost of a smile on his lips. You know, Mox, I think we might just pull this off. Mox floated beside him, a silent guardian of human folly and potential. That's the spirit, Arlo. Just remember, if you fail, I'll still be here to make sarcastic comments about it. With that, they stepped back into the bustling chaos of the Zintari Nexus, ready to face the next challenge. Together, they were the unlikely champions of a species that refused to be defined by its worst impulses. And in a universe that thrived on unpredictability, that just might be enough. Arlo Vex stood in the bustling center of the Zintari Nexus, a locale where the universe's sense of humor went to die. The air was thick with discontent, and the faint aroma of something that might once have been food, and possibly still was, depending on one's species and level of desperation. The Uldari, those ever-jovial hosts, had graciously allowed humans to exist in this claustrophobic hub of political intrigue, but only because evicting them would require more paperwork than the average bureaucrat could stomach. Mox hovered nearby, its circuits humming softly as it processed the cacophony of noise and motion around them. So, Arlo, do you think they're planning a surprise party in our honor, or just a surprise firing squad? Arlo snorted. If there's cake involved, it'll probably be laced with something that'd take more than Tums to fix. No, I think the only surprise is how long we've managed to stay upright in this mess. The two of them wove through the crowd, a collection of beings who seemed to embody the concept of melting pot if the pot in question had been left on the stove too long. Arlo's eyes scanned every face for signs of friendliness, or at least non-lethal indifference. As they passed an alleyway, a familiar voice called out, raspy as sandpaper on a chalkboard. "Vex, over here." Arlo turned to see Grzik, an Ixian who somehow managed to look even more disgruntled than usual, which, given their natural disposition, was saying something. "Grzik, I was just thinking this day couldn't get worse." "Thanks for proving me right. Always here to help," Grzik replied, antennae twitching as if they were trying to pick up a better channel. "Heard you're putting on quite the show for the Eldari." "Yeah, thought we'd mix things up a bit. Who doesn't love a bit of cross-cultural exchange, right?" "Cross-cultural exchange," Grzik repeated, the words rolling off their mandibles like a curse. "Well, word on the street is that your little exhibition might have stirred up some unwanted attention." "Unwanted attention is kind of my specialty," Arlo replied with a smirk. "What's the rumor mill saying, then?" Grzik glanced around, their compound eyes reflecting the neon chaos of the Nexus. "The Eldari are considering expelling all humans from the station. Seems your exhibition reminded them of how unpredictable you lot can be." Arlo's stomach did a somersault. "Expelling us because we dared to show them we're more than just walking disasters." "Pretty much," Grzik said, antennae twitching in what Arlo hoped was sympathy. "They're paranoid as hell. Think you and your kind are a destabilizing influence. Guess they don't appreciate our flair for living on the edge," Arlo muttered. "Thanks for the heads up, Grzik. Looks like I've got some fast talking to do." With that cheerful news tucked under his arm like a cloying reminder of his impending doom, Arlo and Mox pushed through the throng. The air was thick with the scent of frying something, though by the time it reached a human nose, it was more fried. "What the hell is that?" Arlo's neural comm implant buzzed, and he tapped his ear to activate it, the familiar voice of Dethan, another reluctant human ally, crackling through. "Arlo, you're really pushing your luck here," Dethan said, his words like bullets from a grizzled veteran's sidearm. "The Eldari are up in arms." "Metaphorically for now." "Yeah, I got the memo," Arlo replied, dodging a particularly amorous tentacle from a passing vendor. "But I'm working on a solution, maybe something involving less chaos and more, I don't know, diplomacy." "Good luck with that," Dethan chuckled darkly. "Diplomacy's never been your strong suit. You're better at the running away part." Arlo smirked. "True, but it never hurts to try something new, even if it does usually end in tears or explosions, or both." Their conversation was cut short by the sudden appearance of an Eldari official, all sharp angles and sharper expressions. "Mr. Vex," the official intoned as if he were announcing an execution. "Council wishes to see you. Now." "Great," Arlo said, hands raised in mock surrender. "I assume this isn't about a commendation." The Eldari's expression didn't change, which Arlo took as a no. With a resigned shrug, he followed the official back through the labyrinthine corridors, Mox drifting silently by his side like a particularly sarcastic balloon. "Think they've finally seen the light?" Arlo asked Mox, unable to help himself. Mox made a noise that might have been a chuckle. "If by light you mean a new way to get rid of you, then sure." The council chamber loomed ahead, its starkness a reminder that hospitality was a concept lost on the Eldari. As Arlo entered, he did his best to project confidence, though he was pretty sure the Eldari could smell fear like a bloodhound on a scent trail. The grizzled Eldari from before fixed him with a gaze that could have cut through starship hulls. "Mr. Vex, we've reviewed your exhibition." "I can tell," Arlo replied, flashing his most disarming smile, a look somewhere between "trust me" and "I'm so sorry for your loss." "It has come to our attention," the Eldari continued, ignoring Arlo's attempt at charm, that the presence of humanity on this station poses a threat to our stability. Threat? Arlo's smile faltered. We're just trying to show you that humans are more than just agents of chaos. That may be, the Eldari replied, folding their long fingers like a spider contemplating its next meal, but your unpredictability makes you dangerous. We cannot afford instability. Instability, Arlo repeated, searching for a foothold in the conversation. Look, we've got our issues, but we're adaptable. We learn, we evolve. Hell, we adapt to environments that would make a cockroach call it quits. The grizzled Eldari's expression didn't change, but there was a moment's pause as if they were considering his words. And how do you propose to prove this adaptability, Mr. Vex? Give us a chance to prove it, Arlo said, grasping at the lifeline. We can work with the other species here, show you that unpredictability isn't always a threat, it's an opportunity. There was a long silence, the kind that stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Finally, the Eldari nodded once, a gesture so infinitesimal it might have been an involuntary twitch. Very well, you have one chance, but know this, Mr. Vex, failure will not be tolerated. With that, Arlo was dismissed, the weight of the ultimatum settling on his shoulders like a lead cape. He left the chamber, the door hissing shut behind him with the finality of a coffin lid. Well, Mox said as they started back down the corridor, that went better than expected. I expected bodily harm at the very least, Arlo sighed. Yeah, but now comes the fun part. Figuring out how to show them we're not just a bunch of loose cannons. Back in the heart of the Zentari Nexus, Arlo and Mox set to work, rallying their fellow humans and a few sympathetic aliens into some semblance of a coalition. It wasn't easy. Cooperation was a foreign concept in a place where survival usually meant keeping your head down and your mouth shut. Dethan joined their motley crew, along with Rylak, a reptilian whose disdain for the Eldari was only slightly less than his disdain for humans. If those bureaucrats can't handle a little unpredictability, they shouldn't be in charge, Rylak growled, arms folded like battleship plating. Glad to have you on board, Rylak, Arlo said, trying not to flinch under the reptilian's steely gaze. We're going to need all the help we can get. Don't thank me yet, Vex, Rylak replied, his voice a low rumble. This might end up being more trouble than it's worth. Story of my life, Arlo quipped, clapping the alien on the back. But let's show them what we're made of, yeah. The unlikely alliance set to work, transforming another cargo bay into a proving ground for human adaptability. They rigged up displays showcasing human ingenuity in problem-solving, from makeshift shelters in disaster zones to devices cobbled together from spare parts in times of crisis. It was a chaotic, kinetic display of human inventiveness that mirrored the messy, unpredictable nature of the species. Mox floated nearby, offering critiques with the sort of detached amusement only a hovering AI companion could muster. This is either going to be a masterstroke or a catastrophe of epic proportions. Probably both, Arlo replied, double-checking a holo display that flickered ominously. But that's part of the charm, right? The day of the demonstration arrived, and with it, a curious crowd that included not just Eldari officials, but a smattering of other species who'd wandered over, drawn by the promise of human spectacle. The air was tense with expectation, the kind that usually preceded either a grand success or an unmitigated disaster. Arlo took the stage, nerves tingling like a live wire. Ladies, gentlemen, and those beyond such binary conventions, welcome to a glimpse of human adaptability. The demonstration unfolded in a blur of activity, each exhibit a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. The crowd watched with expressions ranging from intrigued to skeptical, the Eldari in particular observing with an inscrutable intensity. Rylak took a turn at the presentation, his gravelly voice narrating a display of human-engineered solutions to alien problems. These humans, for all their unpredictability, have a knack for thinking on their feet. Or their equivalent appendages. There were grumbles of agreement, murmurs of disbelief. But as the demonstration continued, it was clear that the message was getting through. People were talking, exchanging ideas, recognizing a shared potential for growth and cooperation. As the last exhibit concluded, Arlo returned to the stage, his heart thumping like a drumbeat of defiance. We might be chaotic, unpredictable, even downright infuriating at times, but we're also adaptable, resilient, and capable of rising to any challenge. And in a universe as unpredictable as this one, isn't that exactly what you need? The crowd dispersed slowly, the atmosphere one of cautious optimism rather than the previous tension. Arlo exhaled, the weight of his gamble lifting slightly. Mox floated beside him, circuits glowing softly. "Looks like you might have pulled it off, Arlo." Arlo grinned, exhausted but satisfied. "Here's hoping." Just goes to show, if you're gonna be a mess, might as well be the kind that inspires others. Together, they watched as the Nexus returned to its usual chaos, the lingering buzz of the demonstration a reminder that even in a place as harsh and unforgiving as this, there was still room for hope. Maybe, just maybe, they'd shown the galaxy that humanity was worth betting on. And if not, well, at least they'd go down swinging. Arlo Vex stood at the edge of the council chamber, feeling like a flimsy leaf about to be torn asunder by the storm brewing within. The Uldari Council meeting was in full swing, and the atmosphere crackled with tension so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. If you had one, and if butter knives were still a thing in this part of the galaxy. The Uldari officials sat in their high-backed chairs, arranged in a semicircle that made them look as if they were about to sentence him to an eternity of bad reality shows, which, given their opinion of humans, wasn't entirely out of the question. Mox hovered beside him like a silent accomplice, the hum of its circuits the only sound it dared to make in the oppressive silence. "You're late, Vex," Zathan said, the words slithering out of his mouth like a snake with a chip on its shoulder. Zathan was the Uldari equivalent of a power-hungry bureaucrat, which was probably why he found humans so relatable, or so Arlo liked to think. "Fashionably," Arlo replied, flashing a grin that could have been charming if he hadn't borrowed it from a used car salesman. "Wouldn't want to rush into a meeting unprepared, would I?" Zathan's glare was icier than a cryo-freeze gone wrong. "We've received interesting data regarding your activities. Explain yourself." Arlo spread his hands wide, the universal gesture for "I'm innocent" or "I have no idea what's going on but I'm not going to admit it. Just doing my part to bridge the interstellar gaps. You know, building bridges, not burning them. Unless, of course, it's the only option. We know of your demonstration," Zathan continued, ignoring Arlo's attempt at levity, "and the subsequent unrest it has inspired among the council." Unrest was an understatement. The council chamber was filled with the kind of heated debate usually reserved for deciding which end of the galaxy to conquer next. The Uldari factions were splitting like a badly sewn seam, some seeing potential in humanity's knack for chaos, others convinced it was a ticking time bomb. "It's not unrest," Arlo said, trying to sound like he had a plan, "it's progress. You guys are always talking about evolution. Well, consider this an evolutionary leap." "More like a leap off a cliff," Mox muttered, its sensors dimming to a dull glow. "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Arlo whispered back before turning his attention to the council. "Look, humans have been through a lot. Wars, famines, reality TV. Yet we're still here, still kicking. If there's one thing we're good at, it's adapting." The room erupted into the kind of chaos that made herding cats seem like a viable career option. The Uldari were split down the middle, each faction shouting over the other in a cacophony of disagreement that echoed off the chamber's cold, impersonal walls. "Human unpredictability is a threat," one of the council members barked, a sentiment that was met with vigorous nods from those who thought exterminating humans was a splendid idea. "Unpredictability is a strength," countered another, their voice rising above the din with the conviction of someone who's spent too much time reading motivational slogans. "In a universe this volatile, it's exactly what we need." Mox floated closer, its sensors scanning the chaos. "Looks like you've started quite the debate, Arlo." "Debate," Arlo replied, eyes darting between the angry faces. "Looks more like a bar brawl with better vocabulary." Zathan raised a hand for silence, a gesture that spoke volumes of his delusion if he thought it'd actually work. Surprisingly, it did, and the room quieted, although the tension remained thicker than a quantum singularity. "Humanity's history is fraught with conflict," Zathan said, his voice the embodiment of condescension. "Why should we believe that this time is different?" Arlo took a breath, the kind you take before explaining why your latest invention wasn't going to blow up, at least not immediately. "Because history is also filled with our ability to bounce back. We're like those inflatable clowns, knock us down and we just pop back up." Slightly more annoying, sure, but resilient. There was a murmur of laughter or perhaps derision. It was hard to tell with the Uldari. Either way, Arlo was thankful for the brief reprieve. He pressed on like a salesman desperate to close a deal. "We've learned from our mistakes, or most of them anyway. What we bring to the table is a fresh perspective. You keep doing things the same way, you're going to keep getting the same results. That's assuming we want change," Zathan said, his tone as dry as a desert planet's surface. "Why should we risk instability for your so-called fresh perspective?" "Because doing nothing guarantees stagnation," Arlo shot back. "And stagnation is just a fancy way of saying you're dead in the water. Or in this case, dead in the vacuum." The room fell silent once more, the kind of silence that might have been thoughtful or just another pregnant pause before the universe decided to flip the craps table. Arlo could feel the sweat trickling down his back, the tension a living, breathing thing. Rylak, who had taken a seat at the back, decided to throw his voice into the mix. "The Uldari have always admired strength, adaptability. You used to believe it was the path to survival." A ripple of assent ran through a section of the council, faces turning to Rylak with a mixture of respect and irritation. His words held weight, and even Zathan couldn't dismiss them outright. "What's the plan, Arlo?" Mox asked, its tone a blend of curiosity and sarcasm. "Gonna throw another pep rally. Maybe start a support group." "Something like that," Arlo replied, his grin as thin as the line he was walking. "But first, we need to survive this meeting." Another council member, one who looked like they'd eaten too many sour lemons in their lifetime, leaned forward. "Convince us, Vex. Show us what humanity can offer that others cannot." "Challenge accepted," Arlo said, though inside he was quaking like a souffle in an earthquake. "Let's start with human history. It's a mess, sure, but it's a mess that's taught us a few things about survival." He launched into a tale of humanity's past, highlighting moments of triumph amidst adversity, painting a picture of a species that thrived on the edge of extinction. He emphasized their uncanny ability to innovate under pressure, to turn disaster into opportunity. It was a hell of a sales pitch, if he did say so himself. As he spoke, the council listened with varying degrees of skepticism and interest. Some glanced at him with the kind of loathing reserved for bad-in-laws, others with a gleam of curiosity that suggested they were willing to at least entertain the idea. "We've got a knack for seeing opportunities where others see dead ends," Arlo concluded, hoping his words would stick like gum on a boot. "We're not just here to survive, we're here to thrive. And maybe, just maybe, you could use a little of that fire." The tension in the room shifted almost imperceptibly. It was the kind of moment that could swing either way, towards a breakthrough or a breakdown. Arlo stood there, heart pounding, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Zathan leaned back, his eyes narrowing as if he were assessing a particularly dubious piece of art. "You make a compelling argument, Vex, but words are cheap." "Yeah, well, so is your decor," Arlo shot back before he could stop himself. "Just saying." A few snickers echoed around the chamber, an acknowledgement that despite the stakes, humor wasn't entirely lost on the Uldari. Maybe that was a win in itself. "The council is divided," Zathan admitted, his voice dripping with reluctance. "It seems we must consider a vote." The room erupted again, voices overlapping in a discordant symphony of opinions. Arlo watched as the fractures within the council grew more pronounced, lines drawn with the precision of a scalpel. Factions were forming faster than a black hole could swallow a comet, and the implications were as vast as they were daunting. Arlo turned to Mox, who was now blinking with what could only be described as robotic amusement. "Well, Mox, looks like we're neck-deep in it now. You sure know how to make friends and influence people," Mox replied, its tone a blend of sarcasm and admiration. "Yeah, well, let's just hope it doesn't get us spaced," Arlo said, a rare moment of sincerity cutting through his usual bravado. The council continued to argue, with voices rising like the tide of an impending storm. Arlo knew the outcome was uncertain, but he also knew he'd given it his best shot. Now, all he could do was watch and wait, hoping that the chaos he'd sown might just be the catalyst for change. As the debate raged on, Arlo felt a strange sense of hope swell within him, a feeling as rare as a politician refusing a bribe. Maybe, against all odds, they'd managed to shift the narrative, to show the Eldari that unpredictability wasn't just a threat, but an opportunity. And if not, well, at least he'd gone down swinging. Because if there was one thing Arlo Vex knew how to do, it was keep swinging until there was nothing left to hit. Arlo Vex gazed out at the Zentari Nexus through a viewport that had seen better days, his reflection looking back at him like a man who'd just realized he was neck-deep in quicksand. Mox hovered nearby, its sensors flickering with the mechanical equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "Well, Mox, we've really pissed in the Eldari's breakfast cereal, haven't we?" Arlo said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Who knew they'd take a little unpredictability so personally? "Pissed is an understatement," Mox replied, its tone flat as ever. "They've initiated a blockade. No trade, no resources. We're effectively on space rations." Ah, the blockade. Zathan's not-so-subtle way of squeezing humanity until it popped like a grape under a boot. Arlo wasn't entirely surprised. The Eldari loved their power plays, and this one had all the subtlety of a freight hauler in a china shop. "Great," Arlo muttered, crossing his arms over his chest as he faced their immediate future. "Just what we needed. A cosmic game of chicken with no breaks." The Eldari Council had wasted no time, sealing off human sectors like they were quarantining a deadly virus. Supplies dwindled faster than a politician's promises post-election, and Arlo could almost hear the collective groan of humanity as they realized just how tight the noose had become. Gr Zeke, the ever-disgruntled Ixian, slithered into the room, his expression that of a creature who'd just sucked on a particularly Psi-or asteroid. "You humans have a knack for finding trouble, I'll give you that. Wouldn't be much fun otherwise, right?" Arlo replied, his voice a mix of levity and grim acceptance. "Besides, I hear pressure builds diamonds, or it just crushes you into stardust," Gr Zeke shot back, ever the optimist. Arlo sighed, rubbing his temples. "So, what's the plan, Gr Zeke?" "You got some secret stash of supplies you forgot to mention." Gr Zeke's snort was as dry as the Eldari diplomatic enclave. "If I did, you'd be the last to know. But I've heard whispers. Some of the other factions, the ones who aren't entirely sold on the Eldari's methods, might be willing to help. For a price." "Everyone's got a price," Arlo agreed. "Question is, what's yours?" The room fell silent, the kind of silence that felt like the pause before a bomb goes off. Arlo knew they were playing a dangerous game, but there wasn't much choice. Humanity had a knack for survival, but it didn't hurt to have a few friends in low places. "So we grovel," Mox said, its voice devoid of any judgment. "Or we find a way to make ourselves indispensable." "Infallible logic as always," Arlo replied, giving Mox a dry smile. "And here I thought we could just bake them a nice apologetic cake." "Cake might be cheaper," Gr Zeke muttered, his tone dripping with cynicism. "Too bad we're out of flour," Arlo countered. "And I doubt the Eldari are in the mood for a bake sale." The blockade was tight, tighter than a miser's grip on a credit chip. The Eldari had cut off all non-essential resources, which, as it turned out, included pretty much everything that kept humans alive. It was a desperate situation, and desperation had a way of breeding creativity, or madness. Arlo knew they needed to act, and quickly. Humans weren't exactly the galaxy's favorite species, but they were nothing if not tenacious. It was time to rally the troops and see just how much grit they had left. Time to drum up some support, Arlo said, clapping his hands together as though he'd just solved a particularly annoying puzzle. Let's see who's willing to throw in their lot with the underdogs. Ah, the classic Vex charm offensive, Mox remarked, its sarcasm as thick as the tension in the room. Can't wait to see how that turns out. Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises, Arlo said, his bravado as thin as a paper shield against a laser barrage. The Zentari Nexus had always been a melting pot of intrigue and betrayal, and now it was their playground. Arlo and his ragtag group of allies had to navigate the mire of politics and desperation, a task that promised about as much fun as a root canal. They started with the crumbling sectors of the Nexus, where the forgotten and the downtrodden eked out a living amidst the scraps. Here, humanity's plight was met with a mix of empathy and indifference, like a soap opera playing out on a loop. Arlo addressed a gathering of scavengers and outcasts, their faces lined with the kind of weariness that comes from existing on the periphery of a system designed to crush spirits. "We're in a tight spot," Arlo began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who's been through the ringer more times than he'd care to admit. "But then, so are all of you. The Eldari think they can starve us into submission, but they underestimate our resourcefulness." A grizzled old miner spat into the dust, his expression as cynical as it was weary. "Resourcefulness, huh? Can't eat that." "No," Arlo agreed, "but you can use it to find a way out of this mess. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for a chance to prove them wrong. To show them that we're not just stubborn, unpredictable monkeys." That earned a few chuckles, a sound as rare and precious as water in a desert. Gallows humor was a universal language, one that even the most hard-bitten could appreciate. "You've all been pushed around by the Eldari," Arlo continued, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Forced to live in their shadow, scavenge what you can. But together we can show them that we're not just here to survive. We're here to thrive, to make them realize that a blockade isn't enough to break us." "Big words," said a woman with arms like tree trunks and the demeanor of a storm cloud. "But how do we know you're not just blowing smoke up our exhaust ports?" "You don't," Arlo admitted with a shrug. "But what have you got to lose? The Eldari are banking on us folding, on us giving up. Let's make sure they're betting on the wrong horse." The crowd seemed to sway between skepticism and hope, and Arlo knew it was a precarious balance. But then, precarious was the only kind of balance he'd ever known. Zeke slid up beside him as they moved on, his eyes reflecting a begrudging respect. "They like you, Vex. Or at least they don't hate you as much as they could." "High praise," Arlo replied, chuckling despite himself. "I'll take it." Word spread faster than a wildfire on a dry planet. The whispers in the dark corners of the Nexus carried tales of humanity's defiance, of their refusal to lie down and die just because the Eldari were squeezing the life out of them. Odd allies began to emerge from the woodwork, like cockroaches with a sudden interest in collective action. The other factions, each with their own grievances against the Eldari, saw an opportunity to stick it to their overlords by backing the humans. It wasn't altruism, but then Arlo wasn't picky about motivations when his back was against the wall. Mox handled the communiques, its circuits buzzing with activity as it coordinated the tenuous alliances. Humanity was like a stubborn weed, impossible to fully eradicate, and now they were leveraging that stubbornness to their advantage. "Looks like we've got some traction," Mox noted, its sensors bright with activity. "Might even be enough to make a difference." "Let's hope so," Arlo replied, his gaze drifting to the stars beyond. "Because if this doesn't work, we're fresh out of ideas." The Uldari blockade tightened, but with each passing day, Arlo's makeshift coalition grew stronger. Supplies trickled in from sympathetic factions, just enough to keep them going, to keep hope flickering like a candle in a storm. It was a game of brinkmanship, a dance on the knife's edge. Arlo and his allies were playing a dangerous hand, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But then, humanity had never been one to shy away from a challenge. They thrived in the chaos, found strength in adversity, and now, with their backs against the wall, they were proving it all over again. "Feels like we're on a roller coaster without a safety bar," Arlo mused as he surveyed their progress. "But at least we're still on the tracks." "Barely," Grzik replied, his voice tinged with reluctant admiration. "But you humans have a way of turning the tables, or flipping them over entirely," Mox added, its tone as dry as ever. Arlo chuckled, shaking his head. "Let's just hope we don't crash and burn." "I'd rather avoid the whole blaze of glory ending if I can help it." The blockade remained, a looming threat that promised ruin if they faltered. But for now, there was hope, and the glimmers of defiance that refused to be extinguished. Humanity was battered, bruised, and outgunned, but they were still standing, and sometimes that was enough. "Ready for round two?" Arlo asked, turning to his motley crew of allies with a grin that was somewhere between confidence and madness. "Let's give him hell," Grzik replied, his eyes shining with the fire of a true believer. Mox merely floated beside them, its sensors glowing with the light of shared determination. "Seems we've got nothing to lose but everything." And with that, they plunged back into the fray, ready to fight tooth and nail for every inch they could claim. The Uldari had underestimated them, and as Arlo knew all too well, there was nothing more dangerous than a cornered human with nothing left to lose. The Uldari Council hadn't given up, but neither had Arlo. It was a dance of desperation and defiance, a battle of wits in the cold, unyielding void of space. But if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was fighting impossible odds. And as the darkness of the blockade pressed in, Arlo and his allies shone all the brighter, a testament to the resilience that defined their kind. They were battered, beleaguered, but far from beaten. And as long as they breathed, they'd keep fighting, keep pushing back, until the very end. Arlo Vex was not a man easily impressed. He had seen enough of the galaxy's less than desirable corners to grow a thick skin against the bizarre and the miraculous. But when a group of teenagers approached him, grinning like cats who'd just eaten the canary, even he had to admit a smidgen of intrigue. "Lena Mir at your service," the ringleader announced, with the kind of confidence only the young and reckless could muster. Her clothes were as ragged as her hair was wild, and her grin promised trouble of the best kind. Arlo quirked an eyebrow. "Didn't realize Girl Scouts were still a thing. We're not selling cookies," Lena replied, her expression turning to one of mock solemnity. "We're selling a revolution." Mox hovered nearby, its sensors twitching as if trying to make sense of this unexpected twist. "You know, Arlo, I hear revolutions have a terrible return policy." Ignoring the sarcasm, Lena thrust a data pad into Arlo's hands. "See for yourself." The screen flickered to life, revealing a tangled mess of code and a series of damning documents. Arlo squinted at the screen, his brain doing somersaults as it tried to process the information. "This," Lena declared, "is a compilation of the Uldari Council's dirty laundry. Turns out they've been cooking the books, fiddling with council records to keep the narrative in their favor." Grzik, who had been lurking in the shadows like a disgruntled gargoyle, stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "You hacked the Uldari." His voice was equal parts awe and exasperation, like someone who just found a flaming bag on their doorstep. Lena shrugged, as if infiltrating the most paranoid faction in the galaxy was as simple as hacking a vending machine. "Well, when you put it like that, I guess we did. But it's not just us. We've got a whole network of tech-savvy folks who are sick of the Uldari's games." Arlo's mind raced. This was a game changer, a wrench in the Uldari's meticulously crafted gears. "And you're just handing this over to us?" he asked, skeptical of gifts wrapped in such convenient packaging. "What's your angle?" "Our angle," Lena said, her voice gaining an edge, "is survival. We're tired of being shoved into the corner and told to wait while the Uldari play galactic overlord. With this, we can make them squirm." Arlo glanced at Mox, whose sensors glowed in thoughtful contemplation. "Thoughts. Risky but potentially beneficial," Mox replied. "Though I suspect it won't earn us any invitations to Uldari tea parties." Grzik snorted, as if we'd want to attend those. "I hear their biscuits are terrible." With the data in hand, Arlo felt a flicker of hope, a feeling he hadn't dared entertain in quite some time. "All right, Lena. If we're going to make this work, we need to ensure it reaches the right people." Lena nodded, her eyes glinting with the kind of mischief that spelled either doom or victory. "Already working on it. We've got contacts in the council who aren't too pleased with the Uldari's antics. They'll listen, especially when they see how deep the corruption goes." The plan was set in motion, a whirlwind of covert meetings and encrypted messages. The Uldari might have had the firepower, but Arlo was betting on something far more dangerous: the truth. As the hacked information wormed its way through the council's ranks, the first cracks in the Uldari's iron grip began to show. Some of the council members, previously content to let the Uldari lead, were now questioning their decisions, like ants suddenly aware of the boot hovering above. Arlo leaned back in his chair, a smug satisfaction spreading across his face. "Feels good, doesn't it?" "Watching them squirm smells like progress," Grzik commented, a rare hint of a smile tugging at his lips, "though I'd keep an eye out." "Cornered beasts bite." "Duly noted," Arlo replied, his gaze fixed on the viewport and the stars beyond, where the blockade still loomed like a thundercloud. The Uldari retaliated, of course. They weren't the type to let a little thing like insubordination slide. They tightened the blockade further, desperate to suffocate the growing resistance. But in doing so, they only fueled the fire. From the depths of the Nexus, whispers became roars. Humanity, once seen as the underdogs, now had the ear of those who could shift the balance. The Uldari's paranoia worked against them, blinding them to the fault lines forming within their own ranks. "It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck," Mox remarked, the glow of its sensors reflecting the chaotic dance of politics unraveling in real time. "Yeah, only this time, we're not the ones tied to the tracks," Arlo said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "For once, we're in the driver's seat." The council meeting was a spectacle to behold. Zathan, the Uldari official who had made it his mission to detest Arlo and his kind, found himself on the defensive. The accusations leveled against the Uldari were like a hail of stones, each one chipping away at their authority. Zathan's voice, usually dripping with disdain, now carried a frantic edge. "These allegations are baseless. Fabricated by those who seek to undermine our leadership." A council member, a shrewd creature with eyes that missed nothing, leaned forward. "And yet the data is irrefutable." "Care to explain how such discrepancies came to be?" Zathan. Arlo watched from the shadows, a spectator to the unfolding drama. The Uldari were scrambling, their carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of their own hubris. "Looks like someone's getting a reality check," Grzik murmured, his tone laced with a satisfaction born of watching an enemy squirm. "Couldn't happen to a nicer bunch," Arlo replied, not bothering to hide his amusement. The council chamber had become a battleground, words wielded like weapons, accusations flying with lethal precision. Through it all, Arlo remained an observer, content to let the Uldari cannibalize themselves. It was a delicate balance, one that required a deft touch to maintain. The Uldari were not without allies, and those who remained loyal were quick to rally, determined to snuff out the rebellion before it gained too much momentum. "They're like hydras," Mox commented. "Cut off one head and two more appear." "Yeah, but we've got the advantage of knowing where to aim," Arlo said, his eyes glinting with determination. "Thanks to Lena and her crew, we've got the upper hand." The alliance Arlo had cobbled together was diverse, a ragtag assembly of factions united by a common enemy. It was a precarious alliance, held together by little more than shared desperation, but it was enough to push back against the Eldari's tightening grip. "We need to keep the pressure on," Arlo said, addressing his motley crew of allies. "They are on the ropes, but they won't go down easy." "Never do," Grzik replied, his voice a dry rasp. "But we're not the type to shy away from a challenge, are we?" Mox's sensors flickered, a mechanical chuckle. "Indeed. If anything, we thrive in chaos." As the days passed, the cracks in the Eldari's defenses widened. More council members began to question their loyalty, whispering of change and opportunity. The Eldari's iron grip was slipping, and for the first time, Arlo felt the tide turning in their favor. It was a dangerous game, one that required constant vigilance and a willingness to adapt on the fly. But for once, humanity was not just playing catch-up. They were dictating the terms, setting the pace, forcing the Eldari to dance to their tune. "Think we might actually pull this off?" Lena asked, her voice a mix of hope and disbelief. Arlo nodded, a grin tugging at his lips. "I think we just might. And when we do, we'll have a new chapter to write." Grzik snorted, his expression one of grudging admiration. "Never thought I'd see the day. Humans outsmarting the Eldari. Stranger things have happened," Arlo replied, his eyes glinting with resolve. "And if we keep our wits about us, we'll keep on surprising them." Amidst the chaos, Arlo and his allies found themselves growing stronger, more united. What began as a desperate gamble had blossomed into a full-fledged rebellion, a movement that even the Eldari could not ignore. And through it all, the humans remained the constant thorn in their side, a testament to resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. "Feels good to be underestimated, doesn't it?" Lena said, her eyes bright with the thrill of defiance. "Yeah," Arlo replied, his voice filled with the kind of determination that only comes from having nothing left to lose. "And we're just getting started." The Eldari, once so confident in their supremacy, now found themselves on the defensive, scrambling to regain control. But Arlo knew that the momentum was on their side, that the tides had shifted irrevocably. It was a new dawn in the Zentari Nexus, one where humanity was no longer content to be the underdog. They had seized control of their destiny, turning the tables on their oppressors and proving, once and for all, that they were a force to be reckoned with. And as the Eldari scrambled to contain the damage, Arlo couldn't help but smile. Because for the first time in a long time, the future was looking a whole lot brighter. Arlo Vex stood at the threshold of the council chamber, a place as welcoming as a dentist's chair. The room hummed with tension, the sort of atmosphere where you'd expect someone to suddenly shout, "Fire!" just for the fun of it. The Eldari council members, with their eyes like storm clouds and skin as gray as their motives, sat in a semicircle, facing a podium that might as well have been an executioner's block. Zathan, the Eldari official who seemed to have a personal vendetta against Arlo's very existence, sat at the center. He resembled a vulture that had swallowed a wasp, all puffed-up arrogance and underlying irritation. His disdain for humans was as palpable as the sigh or stench of old politics that clung to the chamber walls. Arlo approached the podium, trying to appear nonchalant. Inside, his heart rattled around his ribcage like a loose bolt. "Afternoon, Zathan," he said, letting a sly smile tug at his lips. "Heard you missed me." Zathan's glare could have melted tungsten. "This assembly is no place for pleasantries, human. We are here to discuss serious matters." "Serious? That's my middle name." Arlo glanced at Mox, who hovered silently beside him, its sensors flickering like a malfunctioning neon sign. "Right, Mox?" "Yes, serious as an airlock malfunction," Mox replied, its voice a blend of static and sarcasm. Zathan's patience was wearing thin, like cheap fabric in a sandstorm. "You claim to have evidence of the Eldari's oversights." "Present it." With a theatrical flourish, Arlo produced the data pad, its screen flickering to life with lines of incriminating code and documents. "Behold," he said, waving the device like a magician revealing his latest trick. Proof of human ingenuity and Aldari. Let's call it creative accounting. The council members leaned in, their expressions turning from skepticism to something bordering on alarm. The documents painted a damning picture: manipulation of records, resource hoarding, and a systematic effort to block human progress. It was the sort of scandal that could topple governments and ruin careers, exactly the kind of thing Arlo loved being a part of. Zathan sputtered like an engine on its last legs. This is fabrication, lies crafted to sow discord. Discord? Arlo echoed. Nah, that's just us humans trying to survive your little blockade. You know, the one that's about as airtight as a sieve. A council member whose face was a roadmap of curiosity and cautious optimism spoke up. The evidence is compelling, Zathan. If true, it suggests a misuse of authority that cannot be ignored. Zathan's jaw clenched so hard, Arlo could almost hear his teeth grinding. These allegations are a baseless attempt to undermine Aldari governance. Arlo shrugged, keeping his tone breezy. You say undermine, I say enlighten. Guess it depends on whether you're wearing the blindfold or not. The council chamber buzzed with murmurs, the sound of minds shifting gears. Arlo watched, hopeful but wary, as the Aldari weighed their options. This was humanity's chance, their moment to prove they were more than just the underdogs of the galaxy. Finally, the council member who had spoken before raised a hand, commanding attention. We must consider the implications of this data carefully. If it holds true, the Aldari cannot continue on the current path. Mox nudged Arlo with a playful nudge of its sensors. Seems like they're starting to see the light. Or at least a dim glimmer. About time, Arlo said under his breath. I was beginning to think they were solar-powered and we were stuck in an eclipse. The council voted, each member raising a hand in agreement or dissent. The process was excruciatingly slow, like watching glaciers race. But when the final hand was raised, the majority had spoken. Humans, it seemed, were to be recognized as essential allies, not just pests to be managed. Zathan stood, a picture of impotent fury. You will regret this decision, he declared, his voice as sharp as broken glass. Arlo couldn't resist. Hey, Zathan, they say regret builds character. Maybe you'll finally get some. With the vote passed, the council began to dissolve into conversation, discussing how to proceed. The Aldari's influence, once so ironclad, was crumbling like an old cookie. Unity, tenuous and fragile, began to take root. As Arlo made his way out of the chamber, Lena Mir caught up with him, her expression a blend of relief and triumph. So, we did it. I can't believe it. Believe it, Arlo replied. For once, we're not just surviving, we're winning. Gr Zeke, lurking as usual, emerged from the shadows with a sardonic smile. Humans outsmarting the Aldari. Next thing you know, you'll be driving the Nexus. Driving it straight into a black hole, Arlo quipped. But at least we'll have fun along the way. The group moved through the corridors of the diplomatic enclave, the weight of their victory hanging in the air like the scent of victory pie. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd turned the tables, proving that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, humans could shine. Feels like we're finally getting a break, Lena said, her voice light with newfound hope. Arlo nodded, a grin spreading across his face. Yeah, but don't get too comfortable. The universe has a habit of kicking you in the teeth when you least expect it. And when it does, Mox added, we'll be ready with a mouthguard and a grin. Outside, the stars winked down at them, indifferent witnesses to the day's events. But for Arlo and his crew, they represented something else, a future that for once wasn't entirely overshadowed by the Aldari's oppressive weight. As they walked back to their makeshift base, the chatter was lively, the kind of banter that comes from a shared struggle and a shared victory. It was in these moments, amidst the laughing and the teasing, that Arlo felt the beginnings of something he'd almost forgotten: hope. So what's next? Gr Zeke asked, his tone challenging and eager. Lena shrugged, her eyes gleaming with mischief. I suppose we keep pushing. There's a galaxy out there that hasn't heard our side of the story. Arlo chuckled, feeling lighter than he had in years. Then let's tell it loud and clear. The Eldari might have the numbers, but we've got the guts. And the brains, Mox interjected. Can't forget the brains. Arlo slapped a hand on Mox's metallic form, the sound echoing like a promise. Damn right. Now let's go find ourselves a drink. I think we've earned it. They walked on, a ragtag crew of rebels and misfits, ready to take on whatever the galaxy threw at them next. For now they had each other, a shared purpose, and the knowledge that they'd pulled off the impossible. And that was enough. As they disappeared into the shadows of the Nexus, Arlo couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, the universe wasn't such a grim place after all. Not when you had friends at your side and a whole lot of defiance in your heart. As Arlo Vex strolled through the corridors of the Zentari Nexus, he couldn't help but feel like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Except this time, he'd managed to run off with the entire jar. The Eldari Council, once the dreaded overlords of everything and anything remotely human, had been forced to loosen their grip. The blockade was crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a hurricane, and humanity was finally getting a shot at standing on its own 2 feet. Beside him floated Mox, the ever-present gadget that had been his sidekick through thick and thin. Who knew the Eldari had a sense of humor? Mox said, its voice crackling with static and sarcasm. I mean, letting humans participate in council meetings. That's comedy gold. Yeah, right up there with slapstick spacewalks, Arlo replied, glancing at the device with a smirk. But hey, I'll take it. It's about time they realized we're not just here to be intergalactic scapegoats. As they continued their trek through the diplomatic enclave, Arlo noticed the subtle changes that were already starting to take root. Humans and Eldari, once as friendly as oil and water, were now actually talking to each other without the use of heavy artillery or sharp words. It was a start, albeit a tentative one. Lena Mir joined them, her youthful exuberance tempered by the battles they'd fought. Is it just me, or does the air feel lighter today? Like breathing in less Eldari hot air, Arlo chuckled. Could be the breath of fresh democracy. Or maybe they just ran out of excuses. Gr Zeke, never one to miss a chance to lurk, appeared from the shadows like a bad memory. You did it, Arlo. You actually pulled it off. Don't sound so surprised, Arlo shot back. I mean, sure, the odds were stacked against us like a rigged game of poker, but we've always known how to play with a bad hand. They made their way to what passed as a communal space, a sort of neutral zone where humans and Eldari could mingle without drawing weapons or throwing insults. It was a novel concept, and one that was still in its infancy, but the potential was undeniable. Zathan, still nursing the wounds of his bruised ego, was there too, sulking in a corner like a child denied dessert. His vulture-like gaze followed Arlo and his crew, as if hoping they'd spontaneously combust. Zathan, still here. Arlo called over, enjoying the way the Eldari's eyes narrowed at him. I would have thought you'd be off planning your next grand scheme to keep us down. Zathan's response was a grunt that could have meant anything from go away to I'm plotting your demise. Either way, it was good to see the man reduced to a spectator rather than a dictator. As the day wore on, Arlo found himself reflecting on the roller coaster of chaos they'd been through. At the start, humans had been little more than pests in the eyes of the Eldari, tolerated only because extermination was too much of a hassle. But now they were part of the conversation, part of the future. You're getting all introspective on me, Arlo, Lena teased, nudging him playfully. What's going on in that cynical brain of yours? Just thinking about how far we've come, he replied, waving a hand as if to brush off the sentimentality. From underdogs to equals. Who'd have thunk it, not the Eldari, that's for sure, Mox chimed in. They thought we'd roll over and play nice. Guess they didn't count on us biting back, and biting hard, Lena added with a grin. But what now, Arlo? We've got a voice. Do we use it or just shout into the void? Arlo considered the question, the weight of it settling on his shoulders like an old friend. We use it, Lena. Loudly and often. We've got a lot of wrongs to right and a whole lot of future to build. The The rest of the day passed in a blur of conversation and tentative alliances. The kind of small talk that might just lead to big changes if given enough time and patience. Arlo watched as humans and Uldari worked together, clumsily at first, but with a growing sense of camaraderie that hinted at better days ahead. As the artificial night descended on the Nexus, Arlo found himself standing by a viewport, gazing out at the stars. The galaxy was still vast, still filled with challenges and uncertainties, but for the first time he felt like they had a fighting chance. Mox hovered beside him, its sensors flickering with a soft light. "You know, Arlo, I never pegged you for a dreamer." "I'm not," Arlo replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Dreamers get squashed out here. I'm more of a realist with a penchant for optimism. Same difference, isn't it? Maybe. But I'll take whatever edge I can get." Lena joined them, her eyes reflecting the distant shimmer of stars. "So, what's next, boss?" "Where do we take this momentum everywhere?" Arlo said with conviction. "We've got a lot to make up for. A lot to prove, not just to the Uldari but to ourselves." Zeke, appearing like a ghost who'd lost his haunting privilege, nodded in agreement. "Proving ourselves to ourselves. That's a hell of a concept." "Yeah, well, we're nothing if not ambitious," Arlo replied. "And stubborn." "Don't forget stubborn." "Here's to being stubborn," Lena said, raising an imaginary glass. "To being a pain in the ass," Mox added. "To being human," Arlo finished, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the artificial sunlamps. As they stood there, a ragtag band of misfits and rebels, Arlo realized something that he'd almost lost sight of in their struggle for survival: the true power of individuality and unity. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for a future where everyone, human, Uldari, or otherwise, had a place. And maybe, just maybe, that future was worth all the blood, sweat, and tears they'd shed. Maybe it was worth the struggle, the setbacks, and the sacrifices. "Let's get some rest," Arlo said finally, turning away from the stars. "Tomorrow's a new day and we've got work to do." As they left the viewport behind, heading back into the heart of the Nexus, Arlo felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't the end of the road, not by a long shot, but it was a new beginning, a chance to start fresh. And that was more than enough. The next morning, the Nexus was abuzz with activity as the gears of this new alliance began to turn. Uldari and humans worked side by side, a sight that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. It wasn't perfect. There were still plenty of misunderstandings and tensions simmering under the surface, but it was progress. Arlo found himself in the middle of it all, acting as a mediator more often than not. He was good at it, he realized with some surprise. Maybe all those years of dodging Uldari patrols and talking his way out of sticky situations had finally paid off. "You're a natural at this, Arlo," Lena said, watching as he deftly diffused yet another potential conflict between a particularly cranky Uldari and an overly eager human engineer. "I'm just doing what I do best," he replied with a shrug. "Making it up as I go along. Well, keep it up. You might just end up saving the galaxy." Arlo laughed, the sound ringing out over the din of the busy hub. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, I'm happy just keeping the peace." "Peace is good," Mox agreed. "But chaos is more fun." "Always the pessimist," Arlo teased, patting the device affectionately. "Realist," Mox corrected, its voice a mix of amusement and static. As the day wore on, Arlo found himself caught up in the whirlwind of rebuilding and reconciliation. There were agreements to be brokered, alliances to be formed, and a whole lot of egos to stroke. But through it all, he felt a sense of purpose that made the exhaustion worthwhile. This was what it meant to make a difference. To take a stand and see it through, no matter the odds. And for the first time in a long time, Arlo felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the artificial night fell once more, Arlo took a moment to step back and take it all in. The progress they'd made was undeniable, the changes palpable. There was still a long way to go, but they were on the right path. Lena joined him, leaning against the wall with a satisfied sigh. "Not a bad day's work, I'd say." "Not bad at all," Arlo agreed, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. "We've come a long way, and we've got a long way to go," Lena reminded him, though there was no trace of doubt in her voice. "True, but we'll get there. One step at a time." Grzik appeared, his usual sardonic smile firmly in place. "So, when do we start planning the next stage of our glorious revolution?" Arlo chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Tomorrow. We'll start tomorrow." As they stood together watching the Nexus bustle with life and possibility, Arlo couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride at what they'd accomplished. It hadn't been easy, far from it, but they'd done it. They'd proven that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, hope could thrive. And with that hope came the promise of a brighter future, one they'd fight tooth and nail to achieve. Because if they'd learned anything from their journey, it was that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. Together, they'd make sure the galaxy never forgot it.